All right, today we're going to be talking about my favorite movie from every single year of the 1990s. Welcome everybody to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel, and if you're new to the channel, which I know a lot of people are right now, you might not know that I've been going through a series on this channel talking about my favorite movie from every single year. Decade by decade. I started out with a video on the 1930s and went through every single decade until today. We're finally talking about the 1990s. And the 90s was a special decade because, look, a lot of great movies came out in the 90s for sure, but special decade for me because I was born in this decade. We're finally going to be talking about some movies that actually came out in my lifetime. I have been enjoying doing this series so much, and I want to thank you so much for supporting it if you've been watching since the start. But regardless of who you are, let me know down in the comments below what is your favorite movie from every single year of the 1990s. That's been my favorite thing about doing this series, is hearing from all of you. So let me know down in the comments below. Let's talk about 90s movies. But to kick off with my list, let's start off with 1990. Now, a lot of great movies came out this year, and it was a little bit of a hard decision. I grew up on Home Alone. Home Alone was one of the most important parts of my childhood. Great movie. You got a great Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie, Total Recall. Great horror movies like Exorcist 3 and Tales from the Dark Side. Joe versus the Volcano is one of my favorite kind of weird, quirky rom-coms from this decade. But look, in my 70s video, I talked about how I'm a bigger Goodfellas guy than a Godfather guy, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and choose Goodfellas, my favorite movie of 1990. I actually saw this movie around when I was an early teenager. My dad actually showed it to me. It was one of the R-rated movies that he showed me when I was growing up, and I absolutely loved it then, and I love it now. It's a 2.5-hour gangster drama that absolutely flies by. I'm always blown away by the energy of this movie. Whenever I watch it, it just grabs me from start to finish. It's my favorite Martin Scorsese movie. It's got an incredible lead performance from Ray Liotta. I feel like Ray Liotta doesn't always get all the praise he deserves for this movie. I think people talk a lot about Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro for good reason, but man, Ray Liotta was just the best. Rest in peace. He was awesome. Yeah, Goodfellas is an amazing movie. 1991 was an amazing year for the action genre. I mean, you got Terminator 2 that came out, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. That's one of my favorite movies. I almost kind of wanted to pick that one, to be honest with you. Probably my favorite horror movie from this year is The People Under the Stairs, directed by Wes Craven. Favorite comedy from this year, probably What About Bob? And Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, one of my favorites from that franchise. But one of my absolute top action movies of all time, one of my top movies of all time, came out in 1991, and that's what I'm going to pick. And that is Point Break, starring Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. This movie just means the world to me. I have loved it so much ever since the first time I saw it, and I've been watching it over and over again ever since. It's the movie that really made Keanu Reeves an action star. Only came out a couple of years after Bill and Ted, which is just crazy. And I love Keanu Reeves' just like naive kind of performance in this movie. But Patrick Swayze is just the height of cool in this as Bodie, the bank robbing surfer. And then you got Johnny Utah on his tail trying to take him down by going undercover. Fast and Furious basically remade this movie, but this is the film that did that first. I love the dialogue in this movie so much. I find so many of the lines completely memorable, quotable. That's my favorite kind of action movie, where the action is good and it's exciting, but even the dialogue scenes are really, really engaging. And that's something that really blows me away about Point Break. And it's got that great just beachside surfing kind of atmosphere that's always just really comfortable. And Gary Busey. Gary Busey is so memorable in this movie. Utah. Give me two. In 1992, Tim Burton's Batman Returns came out. I loved that movie ever since I was a kid, pretty much just as much as Batman 1989. For horror films, Ghost Watch is like one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. And one of my favorite Christmas movies of all time, The Muppets Christmas Carol, came out this year. My personal favorite version of A Christmas Carol. But this is another year where my choice is another easy one, because this is another one of my favorite movies of all time. And that is Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Now, my story with this is I was aware of this movie for a long time, but I avoided it for many years because I just expected it was like the Oscar bait Dracula movie. Just the overly classy costume drama Dracula movie that's not really a horror movie, that's kind of resistant to even associate itself with horror. And that's what I expected, perhaps because it's directed by the guy who made The Godfather. And then I was hanging out with friends in like a buddy's room one day in like my early 20s, I think, scrolling through Amazon Prime Video, I remember, and I clicked on this, like, oh, okay, Dracula, sure, let's put that on. and I was completely blown away by it. I don't think any of my other friends were really paying attention, but I sat on the floor in front of the TV and just stared at this, utterly mesmerized. One of my favorite Gothic horror films of all time. The Gothic atmosphere is just exploding in this movie. Gary Oldman, against all odds, becomes one of my favorite Draculas of all time in this film. He's like equally a romantic, alluring Dracula, and a monstrous, horrifying, terrifying Dracula. He has all these different forms. He's got his attractive form for Mina, played by Winona Ryder. Then he's also got this bat monster, a wolf monster. He's got the really creepy, butt hair kind of thing at the beginning of the movie. Visually, this movie is one of the best looking movies ever made, I think. I also love Anthony Hopkins as Van Helsing. Keanu Reeves, I recognize him as Jonathan Harker is a misstep. 2 Keanu Reeves movies in a row. But it just he kind of adds to the charm of this movie for me. Plus, Jonathan Harker is kind of a dope character, like he always is in every adaptation. And Keanu Reeves is another dopey Jonathan Harker. So I can't really complain too much. I love that movie so much. 1993. Okay, this is a big year. Joe Dante's Matinee, one of my favorite movies of all time. A movie I relate to so much. The love of old movies and movie theaters just permeates that whole film. It was really hard not to pick Jurassic Park, because Jurassic Park was incredibly important to me as a kid, and I still love it to this day. 2 of my favorite Jean-Claude Van Damme movies came out this year, Nowhere to Run and Hard Target. But this is another one of my favorite movies of all time. I just think it's one of the absolute best. It's Groundhog Day, starring Bill Murray and Andie MacDowell. One of the best comedies ever made. It's a great movie about improving yourself. I'm always very attracted to self-improvement stories. It's a theme that really resonates with me. And Bill Murray is so good at playing an irredeemable, seemingly jerk at the beginning of the movie. And through this experience of reliving the same day over and over, he goes through so many different phases. He goes through like, let's just go crazy. And then I'm miserable. I just want to kill myself. And then he's just trying to get with Andie MacDowell just for the heck of it. And then he gets to this point where he just starts building himself up. And it's like it's a great way for a movie to show how to get the girl, because a lot of times the two just kind of end up together because that's what the script says. But this shows you that like the way to get the girl is to be the best version of yourself. And I just really appreciate that theme of this movie. It's a theme that not a lot of other movies have. So that just really resonates with me. And Bill Murray, he's just brilliant in this film. It's so funny. It's just one of the best of all time. In 1994, another one of my favorite comedies of all time came out, Dumb and Dumber, a really important movie between my dad and I. I grew up with both of us just really loving that. 2 huge heavy hitters of honorable mentions are Speed, again with Keanu Reeves, love 90s Keanu movies, and Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, which I'm really tempted to pick. I might be doing the wrong thing not picking it. I'm really uncomfortable with not picking it, but I'm just going to go a little bit more out of the box. I love Pulp Fiction. I don't want anybody to get me wrong. I'm going to go with John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness. Look, John Carpenter is my favorite director. This is definitely in my top 5 from him. It's one of my favorite H.P. Lovecraft adaptations of all time. It's starring Sam Neill as this insurance investigator who's investigating this author of really popular, scary books. And he goes into this creepy town called Hobbs End, and it turns out just to be this nightmare purgatory of Lovecraftian craziness. And there's crazy monsters, there's just weird psychedelic stuff going on. It's part of John Carpenter's apocalyptic trilogy, so it kind of deals with the end of the world. It's really ambitious for this little 90s horror movie, and I really think it's one of John Carpenter's best movies he ever did. Man, I just absolutely love this so much. I'm so glad Scream Factory put it out in this nice addition. For 1995, got some more big honorable mentions. Get Shorty with John Travolta, amazing movie. Crimson Tide, Tony Scott, submarine movie. My favorite submarine movie ever made. It's not really a subgenre I'm into, but Crimson Tide is awesome. Jumanji, one of my favorite movies from my childhood. And Clueless, like one of the absolute best teen movies of the 90s. But for 1995, I talked about this in my Movies That Made Me video because it's so important to me from childhood and I still love it. That's While You Were Sleeping. As a kid, I was super into this little rom-com starring Sandra Bullock and Bill Pullman. I just loved it so much and I love it to this day. I mean, I love them as the leads. This is my favorite thing Sandra Bullock's ever done. But then it's got so many great side characters like Peter Boyle and Peter Gallagher, the two Peters. They especially stand out to me as just hilarious in this film. The whole family around Bill Pullman, they're all just so wonderful. And the way Sandra Bullock just kind of finds found family with them, it really sweet, really resonates with me. But it's a it's a crazy nostalgic movie. I absolutely love it so much. The score, even though it's, I know it's not a great score. John Williams, it's not, but it just takes me back. Anyway, I love While You Were Sleeping. I think it's just one of the sweetest romantic comedies ever made. I recommend it so highly. 1996, you got three of my favorite action movies of all time: The Rock, Independence Day, Broken Arrow. I can't say enough about how much I absolutely love those movies. And Wes Craven's Scream. Look, it was kind of hard not to pick Scream. I'm a big Scream fan, particularly the first one. And that's one of the best movies of 96 for sure. But this is another movie that I grew up with, and I just think it's perfect. I think it's one of the all-time greats, and that's That Thing You Do. This movie is actually directed by Tom Hanks, and he actually plays a supporting character in the movie. This makes it look like he's the lead. He's definitely not. But what this is it takes place in the 1960s, and it is about a fictional one-hit wonder band. In the 60s, when there were tons of boy bands that came out in the wake of the Beatles, and a lot of them just kind of had one hit and then just faded into obscurity. This is about that story, but a fake band called The Wonders, and their hit song, That Thing You Do, which you will hear the song That Thing You Do a million times through this movie, and it will never get old. It is such a good song. The whole soundtrack of this movie, which are mostly originals for this film, is incredible. I still listen to the soundtrack on repeat to this day. Such great music. I just love all the characters. I love Liv Tyler in this movie. Such great 60s atmosphere, and just some of the best music ever. So I absolutely love That Thing You Do. I think it's kind of an underrated one. So if you haven't seen it, man, I recommend it so highly. I love it so much. I think 1997 is a bit of a weaker one for me. Maybe I didn't do enough research into it, but I do love Drive, which is an amazing, kind of underrated little action movie starring Mark Dacascos. And Fools Rush In with Selma Hayek and Matthew Perry is weirdly enough one of my favorite romantic comedies of all time. I watched it with no expectations. I was like, how is this movie so good? So Fools Rush In, seek it out if you like rom-coms. But another one of my favorite movies of all time. It's kind of in the running for my favorite drama ever made. You might notice I don't talk a lot about drama on this channel. Not my favorite genre. I'm usually going horror, action, noir, western, comedy. I don't watch a lot of dramas, but this is in the running for my all-time favorite, and that's Good Will Hunting. Look, I saw this movie in my early 20s. Maybe I was like 19, and it is a movie that speaks so deeply to men of that age. It could totally speak to women as well. I'm just kind of just speaking to my experience, because it's about that time in your life when you're directionless. You don't really know who you are. You don't really know where you're going. You're afraid of failure, but you're also kind of afraid of success, and that because that's a lot of responsibility and you don't know if you're ready for it. And this movie speaks to those things so brilliantly. But what it is it's about, it's written by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It's their big first screenplay. And it's the movie that made stars out of them. And it's about Matt Damon's character, Will, who is a super genius, basically. And he's not sure what he's going to do with that intelligence. And he's not sure if he wants to do anything. And he's got people around him pushing him in all these different directions. And he doesn't know what to do. I can't relate to being a super genius. But other than that, I can relate to a lot of other of this, especially when I was that age. So this movie just means a lot to me. And it's my all-time favorite Robin Williams performance. He is one of my favorite actors. I love him so much. And he won the Oscar for a reason for this movie. This is one of my favorite dramas just ever made. Love it so much. 1998 was another easy one, because I keep saying favorite movies of all time. The 90s has a lot of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's because I was really young when I was starting to watch 90s movies, because they were the current movies when I was a kid. And I'm just so attracted to the feel of a 90s movie. Like the best 90s movies are just so technically well made, I think. Even the kids movies. You can't say that about many kids movies these days. But this is not a kids movie. But I do want to give a shout out to The Faculty, Robert Rodriguez, just kind of a Scream era alien monster movie. Wild Things is a really fun erotic thriller. And Out of Sight, kind of another erotic thriller, but more heavy just on the thriller. George Clooney, Jennifer Lopez, fantastic. But my favorite of 98 is definitely The Mask of Zorro. I've been pretty upfront on this channel that I love swashbucklers, I love Robin Hood, I love pirates. I love Zorro. Zorro is one of my favorite things in the world, and he was never better than when played by Antonio Banderas. This is directed by Martin Campbell, who made GoldenEye and Casino Royale. Really underrated action director. It's full of great stunt work, practical action scenes, great sword fighting. I love Anthony Hopkins as Zorro's mentor. I love, oh my man, I just love, gosh, why am I blanking on her name? I feel so terrible. Catherine Zeta-Jones. I love Catherine Zeta-Jones. And Antonio Banderas' sword fight with her, the flirty sword fight is so much fun. Movies are not that... Man, mainstream blockbusters are not sexy anymore, and Mask of Zorro is a sexy mainstream blockbuster. Gosh, well, we lost so much out of the 90s. Yeah, this is just one of the most well-made action movies, I think, of all time. One of my absolute favorites. 1999 is a year that a lot of people think is one of the greatest years of all time. And it's not quite that for me because I'm not as into like the indie 90s scene as a lot of people are. But it's got some great stuff. It's got Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, which I was really tempted to pick, but I'm going to talk about that movie when the 4K comes out later this year. So look forward to that review. That'll definitely be coming. One of my favorite movies of all time. The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser. So good. Stephen Sommers, you just nailed it with that. Notting Hill, one of my favorite Hugh Grant movies. I love Hugh Grant. And I got to give a shout out to 10 Things I Hate About You, which might be my favorite teen movie of the 90s. But another easy choice, one of my all-time favorites, Blast from the Past, which is, I think this is definitely an underrated, or you might say underseen movie. I grew up with this movie, watched it a lot as a kid. There are some movies that I saw a lot as a kid that I rewatch now and I'm like, okay. And there's some that I rewatch now and I'm like, man, this is even better than I knew when I was a kid. Like, I didn't even understand how great this movie is. And that's how I feel about Blast from the Past. A really funny movie that kicks off in the 1960s. Christopher Walken and Sissy Spacek have a little baby. Or no, she's pregnant. And he thinks a nuclear bomb is going to go off because it's during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they go underground to his fully functioning bomb shelter. And they stay down there for 30 years. And they don't come out until the 90s. Their baby is now Brendan Fraser, a full-grown man. And he falls in love with the first girl he meets ever in his life, and that's Alicia Silverstone. And it's them trying to get supplies to bring to his parents, but also kind of falling in love along the way. It's an incredibly funny movie, very sweet. I actually have a theatrical one-sheet poster of this up on my wall. It's one of the best rom-com posters ever. Like, it's not the DVD cover. The original poster, look it up, so much better. But yeah, Brendan Fraser, he's just one of my favorites, and I think this is his best movie, and I think this is his best role. So, kind of a hot take. So there you go. That is my list. My favorite movie from every single year of the 1990s. Please let me know down in the comments below, what is your favorite movie of every year of this decade? People have been asking me if I'm going to do the 2000s. I am. I'm going to do the 2000s, and then I'm going to do the 2010s. So look forward to that. My goal for this month is I'm going to put out a big list video at every weekend. So this is the big list video for this weekend. Next weekend, I'm planning on doing a video on my top 25 80s movies. And I'm doing that because Tim over at the Tim Talks Talkies channel put out a challenge to everybody, all the YouTubers in his sphere, and said, everyone put out a video on your top 25 80s movies, and he's going to put together a master list of everyone's list kind of put together. So look forward to that. I'm really excited for that. But in any case, like this video if you enjoyed it. Give a subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you all so much. And with all that said, don't forget to enjoy yourself this weekend. Have some fun. I'll see you later.